Okay, I have worked in a lot of different industries, but this happened while I worked in a casino chain in the UK. At 19, I was a bartender and shifts would usually be 12 hours at a time. While I worked there, the dress code was smart black, so smart trousers and black shirts, which men and women had to wear because it was comfortable. To get more tips, even though I was classified as a bartender, the company forced the women to work on the casino floor, making us walk in circles around the gambling tables, and made the men stay behind the bar. The women were not allowed to stand still, so even on a quiet day we still had to walk in circles. This was made easier with our uniforms being comfortable. Although it was frustrating to walk around for hours on end, the pay was good, so we complied. Then the company held a meeting and told us how they decided to change the uniforms. Unsurprisingly, the guys' uniforms didn't change at all, but the women were told to wear tight grey dresses you could barely move in and high heels by the next shift. It was clearly to look more appealing and get more tips. Of course, my female coworkers and I were pissed off about this and told the managers that we will not only have restricted movement, but will also be in pain by the end of the night if we have to walk around for hours in high heels on the hard floor. Management did not care and told us to deal with it. After this, we all gathered in the changing rooms and talked about how there is no way we are wearing this new uniform and shouldn't wear it in protest. That's when I had an idea. I suggested that my coworkers do what they have planned and I will wear the new uniform because we needed to prove our point. After a long discussion and hesitation, they agreed and let me do it. The next shift I walked in the building in the new uniform. My god, it was uncomfortable. The dress made it difficult to turn my body round, and bending over was near impossible. It was so tight that when I did kneel down I was scared it would rip. Management were really happy to see that I complied, even saying to my coworkers how they should learn from me. I had to keep it cool while they said that, as I was already started to get sore from the heels. It was a busy night and I was running around like a headless chicken. The dress made it difficult to keep up the pace as I struggled to breathe properly. I think the dress was not designed for this kind of movement, and the pain from my shoes increased to the point that at times I had to attempt to crouch for a second in the back to give my feet a rest. My coworkers started begging me to stop and just get flat shoes on for my own sake, but I declined, stating how I needed to prove our point, so I pushed on through the pain till the end of the shift. Management came in when we all finished to see how everyone was and asking me how I found the shift. I smiled and said it was great with one small problem. I removed my shoes for the first time in 12 hours and stood in front of my managers mildly shaking. Their faces went from all smiles to shock when they looked at my feet to see my blood running on the floor from the open wounds on my heels. The injuries covered the entirety of my heels with dried blood on the back of my shoes. They started telling me I should not have done that and should have worn flat shoes, but I reminded them, saying, but it's part of the new dress code. I had to wear high heels, like you told me. As the injuries were exposed, I started to feel the pain intensify and had to hold back tears, but my shaking got worse. They made me sit down and got the first aid kit for my feet as I started to unzip the back of my dress, saying how hard it is to breathe. The dresses were still compulsory, but the dresses were made looser and we never had to wear high heels on shift again. This malicious act of compliance is still ongoing. For some context, I'm a university student host living on my parents' couch for the next 2 weeks before I move back into my school's town. They are currently redoing their pool, with employees working MF. I pay my own rent at a room near my university, so I signed up for a clinical trial to take off the added burden of paying for my expensive medicine while getting some grocery money at the same time. I had an appointment early this morning for the trial, and I told my mom about it last night. She immediately disapproved, stating that she didn't want me to be a guinea pig for money. So she woke up before me and took my car out, so I couldn't drive it. The only other car in the driveway is her big truck, which I'm uncomfortable driving, but will if I have to. So I called her and told her that because she took my car, I'll be driving her truck to the appointment instead. She of course flipped her lid and screamed at me about being a sellout. Y'all, am just trying to get some grocery money here. My mom also made it clear that she has her own plans and won't be back with my car until later today. She then ended the call saying that I am, in no circumstances, allowed to drive her car. Fine. Whatever. I rescheduled my appointment and went back to the couch to try to sleep when the pool workers showed up. They have a huge concrete truck that can only be used when the driveway is empty, but my mum's car is of course plopped in the middle of it. So they can't start working until my mum's truck is moved out of the driveway, and with no one else home this means that I'm the only one who can do it. Oh, except for the fact that I'm in no circumstances allowed to drive her car. Whoops. I work for a company that specializes in railroad maintenance, construction, and solutions. Naturally I travel for work a considerable distance. Currently I stay in a hotel 1000 plus miles away from house, an 18-hour drive, 20 if there's traffic, and work a 5-2-2 schedule. Now my agreement initially with said company was that instead of getting to go home every weekend like everyone else, they all live within 6 hours away, I get to go home 1 week out of the month, sometimes 1 week out of 2 months. Come the end of me being out in the field for a month, my foreman gets a phone call from my superintendent saying that I do not get to go home. I have to be at work the following Monday and I only get the weekend to go home just like everyone else, regardless of the fact that it's impossible for me to make that drive, do anything more than sleep, and then drive back to work on a weekend *A and D*. The previous agreement when I got hired. Now for a few bits of background. When we go home in a personal vehicle we must claim the mileage to come back to work, and we must get paid for said mileage. Now here's the caveat, you can go stay wherever on those weekends, but you must always claim mileage from your home to your site no matter what. If you won't let me go home once a month and only claim mileage once a month, then I will go home every weekend and claim my mileage. You guessed it, every goddamn weekend. I get 700 plus each mileage claim, and they cannot dispute it, because their policy is, every laborer gets to go home every weekend and everyone must be paid for their mileage to their job site. So instead of going home and seeing my family once a month, and charging mileage once a month, I'm now forced to wait until the off season, work the other 10 months of the year, so you're damn right in claiming my thing mileage for my weekend home visits all the other 44 weekends of the year. This malicious compliance just happened. I live in London, where the underground is pretty busy during rush hour, but especially so today, because the train that was due had been held at the previous station, so by the time it reached the station I was in, it was sardines in every carriage. I stepped into a carriage near the door, and stood next to a guy who was standing by the door. At least 2 layers of people pushed in past me such that I didn't even need to hold on to anything, apart from my backpack which I removed and held in front of me by its straps, because people who don't remove their backpacks on a crowded train are the absolute worst. However, due to being squeezed so tightly my elbow kept being pushed lightly into the guy's side every time the train braked, and I had nowhere to move because we were all crammed so tightly. Before I could look at him and apologize, he rudely shoved on really hard away from him. The train braked again, and he repeated his shoving, so the conversation went like this. Me, can you please not do that? Him, with barely suppressed rage, well you keep elbowing me on the side. Me, I don't intend to, but I'm holding my bag and I'm being pushed. Where do you expect me to move to? Him, well every time you elbow me, I'm going to shove you away. Don't stand next to me if you don't want that to happen. Me, do you honestly think I want to stand next to you? We are all trying to take this train somewhere. It's not just you. We are all being squeezed and crushed here. Him rolls his eyes. So I decided to comply with his request to not stand next to him. At the next stop I shifted and made space to allow any new incoming passengers to stand next to him. A big guy with a duffel bag took my place and stood next to him, and I could see the guy being bumped and elbowed. Again, I caught his eye as he glared at me, and I smiled back sweetly at him. The next stop was a woman with a boxy handbag with sharp corners. Even better. For the next 7 stops I made sure to subtly move such that any newcomer would stand next to him, and he never got a moment without being shoved by more and more passengers and their luggage and limbs. and I kept smiling at him every time he looked at me, and he kept glaring at me for complying with his request. When I was in high school back in the late 90s, one of my teachers shared a story with the class in order to explain why we would have a substitute teacher in the next week. This is by far my favorite story in the vein of malicious compliance. My teacher was in his late 30s, married for only a couple of years, and over the summer he and his wife bought their first house together. As is typical, the house was in a development that had an hoa. While he wasn't thrilled at the idea of a meddling hoa, it is a necessary and unavoidable evil. He went through their CCRs with a fine-tooth comb and decided that, while there was some stuff he wasn't a fan of, overall he could live with it, so they signed the papers and bought the house. About a week after they move in, they get a non-compliance letter stating that the tree in their front yard was not an approved species and must be removed. Problem is the tree was native to that spot, was estimated at 80 to 100 years old, and was a pecan. I mention the type for two reasons. First, a pecan produces nuts, obviously, and that is why the hoa said it can't be in the front yard. After all, a lawnmower flings a rogue pecan through a neighbor's window and there will be an issue. The second issue is that this was in the Dallas, Texas area. The pecan is a state tree of Texas, and as such gets a little legal protection. Basically, to cut one down you need to have a permit. To get that permit you have to show the tree is diseased or a hazard. Just being in the way is not sufficient. My teacher is upset as the tree is large, provides lots of shade, and he likes eating pecans. He writes back to the hoa, who turn a deaf ear and point to the CCR and refer him to their legal team for any further questions. He then contacts the county and state, who both come back with he can't remove the tree without a permit or he will face a large fine and or jail. He copies that letter and sends it along with his own letter in a certified envelope to the hoa lawyers. The lawyers come back that the CCR is binding. He is not allowed to have fruit or nut producing trees in his front yard, but ornamental trees of flowers and flower pots, this part is important, are fine. If it isn't removed in 30 days they will begin fining him. At this point he gets his own lawyer and turns it over to him. A couple of months go by, and we are to the part of this story where he is explaining why there will be a substitute. He will be going to court to have a judge weigh in on the matter. The next week comes, and after the court hearing he comes in and says that basically he lost as the judge ruled the CCR did apply and the tree had to go. However, since it was a native tree at the time of development, the hoa would be responsible for all costs of removal, not him as the homeowner. Now, most people probably would have let it go at this point. Sure, you lost the tree, but it isn't costing you anything. Not my teacher. The man decided it was time to protest the overreaching hoa and their absurdity. So, he got to reading. After going through the CCRs thoroughly, he took a trip to Home Depot and bought some hose, fittings, and a nicer Kohler toilet. He set the toilet up in the middle of the yard right where the tree had been, and ran the hose and fittings to his outside faucet, so that it was hooked up for water in, not hooked to a sewer. This is the front yard after all. He then dumped some potting soil in the bowl and planted some decorative flowers. It took a few weeks, but the non-compliance letter came in stating he had house waste in front yard and it must be removed within 72 hours or he will be fined. He wrote back there was no house waste. They responded again, and he stated they needed to come show him where this supposed waste was. The next day an hoa guy comes out and points right at the toilet and says it cannot be there, it is an eyesore. My teacher responded, sorry you feel that way about my self-watering flower pot, but I see nowhere in the CCRs that state what style of flower pot is or is not allowed. Hoa guy gets verbally heated and threatens to call the cops, to which my teacher agrees. Having his bluff called, the hoa guy leaves. A week or so goes by and the class I am in is pestering our teacher every day for new stories on this. He said he got a letter from their lawyers, which he sent straight to his lawyer. His lawyer agreed with him that the CCR in no way, shape, or form puts any qualifiers or limitations on flower pots, and as the flowers are clearly visible, it doesn't constitute debris or trashing the yard. A few back and forth things happened between the lawyers, and then the hoa moves for a trial, which gets the same judge as before. The judge reviewed the case and dismissed it as frivolous. He did put in his remarks or decision something along the lines of, while the defendant's choice of a flower pot is eye-raising and isn't traditional, there is nothing illegal about his use of a commode as art in his yard. The plaintiff has failed to demonstrate any sound reason this would violate existing rules and bylaws of their association. If you enjoyed the stories, slap the like and subscribe button for more of them, and don't forget to support the original writers with an upvote. Links are in the description. Peace out, and catch you tomorrow.